welcome everyone, whenever you are in the world. Before I engage our panelists, I want to start with a question for the audience to think about, and then we'll dive into our uncomfortable analysis. Here's the question. Where do you think the highest risk location is inside your organization right now? If you think the perimeter, well, you've already built walls around it. Shouldn't that be covered? If identity is the first thing that came to mind, you probably have an IDP or maybe an ITDR product or three. If you thought SaaS, you've got an SSPM. You've been tackling problems as fast as the industry identifies them. Here's what we keep running into. The tools that we build, the categories that we create, the architectures that we deploy, they're all pointed at layers of the enterprise that are no longer where the most interesting action is happening. So today, we're going to talk about what's happening in the layer underneath all of that. And to have that conversation properly, I've got two people who know this from very different vantage points. First, Amir Khayat is the CEO and co-founder of Vorlon. Amir helped build Demisto, the SOAR platform that taught a generation of security operations teams how to automate their way to speed and scale. Vorlon exists because he saw what came next when that automation got turned into an attack surface. Welcome, Amir.
Hi, Andy. Great being here.
Great to have you. Now, Leon Ravenna is the CISO of OPENLANE. Leon has been doing this for 30 years, healthcare, financial services, technology, and he's living this problem right now, today, inside a multinational enterprise. He's not theorizing, I think that's a dig at me, he's operating. Welcome, Leon.
Great, good to be here.
So we're also going to spend some real time with data. Vorlon just published the 2026 CISO Report, a survey of 500 US CISOs conducted in January and February of this year. Some of what it found should change how you think about your security posture. So we're going to get into it, and we'll make the report available to you so you can go download it after this conversation. So first, Amir, I want to start with a definition question, because this is one of the biggest challenges we often have in security is we use the same words to mean different things. So when you say agentic ecosystem, like, what do you mean, and why does it need its own attack surface category? Because aren't we really just talking about SaaS security with a new coat of paint?
Think about agentic AI ecosystem is kind of your new version of network topology. When we're thinking about that, it's no longer the server and endpoint topology that you need to map, but basically your organization are leveraging API integrations, AI agent today that act autonomously. And for that, you need to have a better visibility monitoring capabilities and the ability to protect your data as it moves outside of your perimeter.
It's almost like the microservices world, except it's microservices of AI. So Leon, you're running security for a global organization. Right now, today, we appreciate you taking some time to join us. So when Amir describes the agentic ecosystem, these AI agents moving data between systems at machine speed, OAuth tokens that provide persistent access without human approval, does that map to what you're actually seeing in your environment? Or does the vendor framing have any disconnect from operational reality here?
I think the vendor framing is probably a little bit different. This world is a lot of chaos right now. What's happening on the endpoint? What's happening with MCPs? What are you connecting to? How are you connecting? You're seeing daily things in the news that are just, keep me awake at night. So I think it's a combination of both. It's going to be a nice ecosystem, but also the vendor framing is kind of hard to deal with.
Well, is it hard to deal with, just curious, because the vendor framing is just disconnected, or simply because this is going to be a hard problem to deal with, however it ends up getting framed?
For one, you have a lot of vendors in this space. A couple people that, hey, I built these 2 agents that you didn't build, so you should buy them. Will they be around in 6 months? Don't know. And so that's part of the problem is just understanding and vetting what's actually happening.
That's very realistic. I just walked the RSA show floor a month ago. 37% of all booths said agent or AI on them. So I think there's a lot of different vendors with different framings I think we need to keep in mind. Now, I want to jump into the report, Leon, because there's a headline number that was staggering to me, and I want your opinion on it, which was that 99.4% of organizations experienced a SaaS or AI ecosystem incident in 2025. That's basically everyone except for 3 of the 500 respondents. So this feels like this should really just be the most urgent problem. Every CISO should be focused on their SaaS/AI/agentic ecosystem, however they're calling it. Is that problem really how organizations are looking at it? Is this a mandate and a conversation from the board?
So first of all, the three people that haven't experienced something don't know what they're missing. To be polite.
That's very fair. A very recent public breach affected me, and I'm a one-man shop right now, so I can't imagine how an enterprise CISO wasn't affected.
One of the things that we're starting to see, particularly in the SaaS world, is there's a lot of things that just aren't configured right, that you're not seeing that come by default with things turned on that you wouldn't expect. And that's where, I'm a Vorlon customer, and I look at some of my tools with Vorlon to understand what's happening.
So this is going to be an interesting one. I'll come back to that in a minute. But first, Amir, we've talked about this front door versus the engine room framing. And I think there's already a whole generation of tools, whether it's SSPMs or CASB or ITDR, that these are well-established markets, right? We think we've protected the front door, but what specifically are they blind to? And so where does that coverage end that we need to deal with something inside the engine room differently?
Yeah, I think we all agree that the market is moving fast and challenges are different for the security teams. When we are talking about the front door is mainly about solutions that focus on static data and from a user perspective, which today, with the acceleration of AI agents and the fact that every person in your organization can create now either an internal agent that will access your data or an integration of agents. Basically, that's what we called the engine room, right? And we've seen that just, a few days ago with the Vercel incident that essentially came from a four-party that was connected to their Google Workspace and impacted Vercel and might be others. And that's kind of like where the focus should be today on the engine room.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if we should stop saying fourth party and now just say like 10th party, because it feels like it's not even somebody connected to one of your vendors. It's somebody connected to a vendor of your vendor of your vendor. It's crazy at this point.
Or to an agent that connected to an agent.
That connects,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, agree with you. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Fair point.
Yeah. Okay, so Leon, you've also worked in financial services, and there's an insurance angle in this report that was striking, that insurance CISOs have, I guess, the lowest risk perception of any vertical. Only 17.7% viewed AI agents as a critical risk, compared to 45.3% in financial services at large. That's a huge difference. They also have the lowest OAuth governance. Only 22.6% have comprehensive real-time visibility there. The report argues that this lower risk perception is a downstream consequence of lower visibility. If you don't see it, you're not alarmed, and you don't see the problem and don't think it's a real problem. Does that framing ring true from your experience? And is the insurance sector about to get a very expensive education?
If those numbers are correct, then yes, they're probably going to get an expensive wake-up call. I think there's also there's a visibility to what you see, but there's also a visibility to what you're going to find out. What are you exposed to? Where are the problems? I drive myself nuts almost every night looking at various sources trying to figure out what's the next thing that's coming. And so there's two angles on visibility. It's what you see right in front of you, and it's what you're hunting for.
And so I think what the question that I've got about this risk perception, and maybe you've got better visibility, is when we talk about AI and tools, often the first place security professionals jump to is the tools that they themselves are going to use or the tools that organizations will use. And I think what sometimes gets left out is the tools that a random employee thinks they're going to use. And so in the same way that SaaS started to enable, like anybody with a credit card could start to buy new vendors, are we seeing that same proliferation in real time right now inside organizations, Leon?
I would expect that you are. Because it's democratizing the ability to, for instance, can I make my calendar more efficient? Can I make myself more efficient? And there's really, unless you are either far right or far left on the pendulum, you're blocking everything, you're blocking nothing. People are like water. They're going to gravitate towards where they think they're getting stuff done.
I love that. It's because I think the biggest challenge we often see is people who are in security jobs not recognizing that the people who are doing things we don't like are just trying to get things done. And let's talk about getting things done, Amir. So you built SOAR at Demisto, I think really a category defining operation. You spent years helping enterprises automate their security operations to help humans go faster, so they can get things done. But now you get to watch AI agents basically automate the attack surface itself. So is that an irony you're now living with? Did building the automation infrastructure enable this problem? Is this all your fault?
Fair question. And yes, there is irony here for sure. I think that every technology wave comes with a lot of advantages, but it also requires from security team to reflect, understand if it actually works well with their current program. And I think that the big difference, I would say, between what was back then with automation is that is no longer just in the hands of the defenders.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen that with Project Mythos, and now security team are trying to help with Glasswing. I think that the fact that attackers can leverage that definitely puts the challenge in a different spot. And therefore, again, going back to the comment, I think that because the market changed so fast and you don't want to slow down your business, you actually want to be this enabler, you have to start focus on the execution layer and understand what data you share and how you can actually see what you don't see today.
Yeah, and I think seeing what you don't see is going to be the hard challenge, because one of the things out of this report, and Leon, I'm going to get your take on this one, is that the average organization in this survey runs 13 security tools, not for the whole enterprise, just to cover SaaS and AI. In financial services, where we tend to see the most investment, that's up to 16. And yet we still see these above average breach rates, in FinServ, it's 83 to 97%. The CISOs are reporting that they can't do the things they need to do to secure their AI and SaaS ecosystem. So despite having 16 tools, they're still not getting it done. So Leon, you've managed so many security tools. So what does this tell you? Is this tool, people, process, architecture? Where's the problem?
I'd say it's all. I would love to have 16 tools for just SaaS and a couple of the areas that I deal with. We try and do a lot more with what we have. The real thing here is it's all, because it's people, it's process. It takes months for a new engineer to get up to speed on what a typical environment looks like. And if you don't have the right people running the tools and the process behind it, you are victim to the architecture that's in place. And that's not good nor bad. It's just it is what it is. And yep. I think you have to look at all of them and understand, in a world where you have to automate everything you're doing because the bad guys are automating everything they do. And quite frankly, I expect in the next 6 months, it's not going to be the typical bad guy. It's going to be, hey, I'm handing a list of IP addresses to, one of the LLMs and saying, go, let me know what you find out. You can't obfuscate yourself anymore. And so security teams have to fall back to, what do they have right now? They're not going to be able to go hire a dozen people tomorrow. The people don't exist. And then they're going to have to rely on the process they have in place or update that to have a fighting chance going forward.
And I think that's going to be a real challenge. I think you just hit a nail on the head that, around not enough people. I think we've already seen this in the non-human identity world. They vastly outnumber human identities. I think the last report I saw on it, a year ago, was like more than 30-to-1 non-human to human identities. I suspect it's much larger now and expanding. And so that's service accounts, that's OAuth tokens, that's API keys, bots, agents. 5 out of 6 CISOs said their security tools were just lacking in their ability to distinguish between human and non-human behavior. So Amir, for the practitioners on this call, help them understand what that's going to mean concretely. What is an attacker doing in that blind spot right now?
Yeah, it's exactly as we started. I think that this is part of the gap that exists today in the industry with tools, right? Like the fact that you can see the engine room. That's part of the challenges. Now, I think that the problem is there, like going back to the Vercel and even the recent Shiny Hunter Group attack on Salesforce, Salesloft, and Drift, and some others. I think that what we're starting to see is that it's no longer let's go deploy a malware. It's much more easier to go and gain access to your data and start to do data exfiltration and move laterally between those applications. And this is what attackers are doing today. So it's not just monitoring who is accessing your tool, it's an efficient way to understand what is actually being done there, being able to identify it very, very quickly and act on that so you're not impacted.
And I suspect with the agentic world, there's a huge piece of we now have non-human agents that are just using the human identities. And so traditionally, if you just look at whose identity is this, you'll think it's a human if you're not doing the analysis to detect that that's really a non-human.
It's actually interesting, Andy. I've seen stories of people going out and buying Mac Minis to run OpenClaw. They're separating it on a hardware, but they're using their own accounts. And so there's the thought of, yes, I'm physically separating, but logically they're using all their own stuff and doing damage to themselves as they go.
I will say I've got a Mac Mini to be an agent, but I set it up as a different human inside my enterprise. So there's really two of us, me and my OpenClaw agent, who doesn't have access except as a sort of assistant, but I still think I'm screwed. So I don't rely on that working. I think, Leon, that comes into a really interesting contradiction that we read in the data, which was almost 90% of the CISOs surveyed said that they have strong OAuth governance. And then 27.4% were breached via compromised OAuth tokens or API keys. So that's not a small gap, right? That's a huge chasm between this perception, this belief that we've got governance in place, and the reality that, no, actually, apparently we didn't. So as an operator, how do you tell a story about that to yourself or to members of your community?
Again, going back to visibility, understanding what do I have, where do I have it, it ends up causing quite frankly, a lot of anxiety around, hey, what are we actually searching for? We're looking more at kind of runtime tools to help us with some of that, because we have to know where stuff is at any given minute. And I think the notion around the gap, in a lot of ways, go back to the front door. We're opening the front door because we're giving the identity away, and so we're letting people walk through. When they're trying to walk through, they're still trying to go through mail and everything else, but we're letting them walk through the front door.
Right. It's like trying to prevent a museum heist by only worrying about after hours attacks, potentially. Might be a way to look at that challenge there. So Amir, 1 in 3 enterprises, 30%, experienced what they considered to be suspicious AI agent activity last year. So that was year 1 of serious agentic deployment. So since we're really at the beginning of the curve, what do you think that 2026 and 2027 are going to look like if nothing really changes based on current course and speed?
It's hard to predict, but I think we're seeing the direction and where it heads, right? I think that with the shift to SaaS, you need to have a business application owner to governance and to secure the operation. Right now, security team challenges is to actually understand how many new developers are now building things that are connected to the organization data through Claude, through Cursor, through others. So I think that instead of focusing on, X amount of business application owner in the IT department, right now you might have, almost every person in your company become a business application owner. And I think that creates a lot of challenges, and security team, again, need to reflect and see how to approach this new challenge.
Great. So I don't want to leave you just on the doom and gloom note. So Amir, let's wrap this up. And I want you to give every CISO in the audience one thing to do this week, one concrete action that'll move them forward meaningfully to get agentic ecosystem security. What's that action?
Besides the fact, go to our website, Vorlon.io, and request the demo.
Of course.
I would say that it goes back to what Leon mentioned a few times, is know what you don't know. I think that every security leader today, again, with the acceleration of AI agent in the organization, if you don't want to slow down the business and you want to be the enabler, you have to know what is connected to your environment, what data they're touching. And I would say, first question, ask yourself if you know that, and if not, then act.
You know, I really love that one. I was doing a talk a while ago about building a security program, and one of the things I said is, you know, when you do go try to know something, write down how long it took you to get an answer, because if it takes you 6 weeks and 2 program managers to go get an answer, you have a serious blind spot, and that's also a place to pay attention to. So, Leon, tossing the same question to you, but slightly different spin, since you've got the operator's perspective. So what is one lever you've pulled that gave you better visibility or control in this environment?
So the first thing I would do, even before that, for the CISOs in the room, is take a deep breath, because your world just accelerated dramatically in the last 60 days, and time compression is not your friend. So take a deep breath before you do anything else. Number 2 is try and figure out, again, what you don't know. One of the best spots I would look at is, what do you have on your endpoints? You know, what IDEs are people using, and what MCPs are they using, and what are they connecting to? You know, you can start to get to some of the cloud stuff, but it's I would be worried first about the endpoint, and to Amir's point that it may be everybody in the organization. At some point it may be, unless you have admin rights turned off.
Yeah, that's going to be a hard nut to swallow for a lot of folks. So I want to thank both of you. We started this conversation by asking where the threat actually is inside the organization. I hope that we've given everybody attending a clearer answer, a sharper mental model, and maybe a few uncomfortable questions to take back to your own teams. The front door is locked, but the engine room may need some attention. So thank you, Leon Ravenna, Amir Khayat, for really bringing us an honest and important conversation. I'd like to thank Vorlon for sponsoring this discussion that I think the industry generally needs to have and needs to keep having. If you haven't yet read the report, I recommend you dive in, because we've only skimmed the surface here today. As you can see on the slide, Vorlon has made it easy for you to grab a copy of the report, get in touch with them if you have further questions, or just follow them on LinkedIn. Have a fantastic day, folks.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Leon.